Welcome to the Selling to Corporate podcast, where we're going to be challenging your sales beliefs around selling to corporate organizations and help you increase your bottom line profits every single month. I am Jessica Lorimer, your sales expert and guide in this world of selling to corporate companies, skyrocketing your company sales and making the impact that you really want in the world. Now, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show today, please do head over to iTunes and leave us a review. But enjoy this episode, and I am really looking forward to sharing some epic sales wisdom with you. Here we are, the end of June, and I'm just going to take a couple of minutes before we drop into this episode about half-year sales analysis, which I know you might not be thinking is very exciting yet, but it actually is, and you're going to love it, to give you a little insight into my world, because I've had a few people, very kind people, reach out and say, Jess, we haven't seen any posts from you on LinkedIn for a while. Are you okay? Are you alive? What's going on in life? And do you know what? I thought the best possible place to talk about that is on the podcast, because it's easier. For a start, it's easier. And also because I like to share things with my real friends. Are we friends? I feel like we are. Like the podcast, we're all friends. And I feel like the podcast is the best place for that, and the newsletter and things. And I just wanted to quickly at the beginning of this episode address it, because I've had a lot of messages and actually I'm quite flattered. So if you have messaged me to ask where I've been, thanks. I honestly wasn't aware that the very limited amount of stuff that I was doing on LinkedIn was actually resonating with people anyway. So it's kind of cool to understand that people missed me from the interweb. But there is a reason or a method behind my madness, as ever. And it was that over the last probably 8 months, and maybe behind the scenes, maybe people haven't been as aware, there's just been a lot going on for me. I had a couple of family bereavements, which, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, suck, and meant that I just had other responsibilities, in terms of supporting my family through things that were quite difficult and challenging. And then we tried to buy a house, and the house that we were originally going to buy fell through. Again, I'm sure many of you have experienced that, and the absolute soul-crushing amount of administration that is required when that happens. And then we found another house, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And we're going through the house buying process, and there's a ton of admin involved with that as well. Like, I want to give you my money in exchange for a house. Let me. Surely it shouldn't be this hard. Those of you listening in Australia or New Zealand, by the way, you guys have the best house sales process in the world. Like, I hear you can actually complete an exchange on the day. That is not the same in the UK. I've spent about 9 weeks just chasing everyone else for their things in the process. I seem to be, and maybe it's because of my tenacity learned through a career in sales, that I'm the person who's just following everything up endlessly. And I have actually said to people on the phone, I will keep calling until I get this information pack, whatever it is that I need. And I think at this stage, people are just doing things because they are tired of hearing my voice. So it's busy. Life has been lifing. And because of that, it's meant I've had more limited time, than over the last few years, where I've been lucky to just kind of bimble around, running my business, doing my things. And I had to start looking at the things in my business that were meeting my two most important values, cash and joy. And I've talked about that a lot on the podcast over the years, but the two things that matter to me most in my business are cash and joy. And so for me, posting endlessly on social media, even though I was very limited and doing it like maybe 3 times a week, just became a complete non-priority. And some people will be thinking, well, hasn't that lost your business? Maybe you're even thinking, but Jess, I haven't bought from you because you're not giving me any free stuff on LinkedIn anymore. And you might also be thinking, are you going to return? These are all questions I've asked myself. So as soon as I figure it out, I'll let you know. But in all seriousness, for me, one of the most important things has been keeping my business development process in place, and posting free content on LinkedIn, just like I tell you, is not a core component of my business development process and shouldn't be something that you are heavily reliant on either, whether you're selling B2C or B2B. And hopefully you're selling B2B because you're here listening to this, which is all about selling to corporates. So it'd be weird if you were only selling B2B. However, I will say that I don't think I've missed it. I thought I would. I thought I would miss the dopamine fix of like, oh my gosh, I got 14 likes or something. And I haven't, and for me, I think that my commitment to my business, certainly this side of my business where I'm supporting entrepreneurs to sell to corporates, in the last 6 months definitely has been much more about support my clients even more deeply than I was doing before, making sure that they are getting the best kind of implementation support possible. In fact, inside the C-suite, I've run an extra sprint this year. Inside cold to closed, I've been able to work with some phenomenal people to get them started in their 90-day process to building their actual qualified pipeline for corporate clients. And that's been incredibly rewarding. And all of the additional time and headspace that I would have spent, creating a couple of LinkedIn posts has been able to go on things that have been much more valuable. So I don't know is the answer to, will I come back? I don't know whether I will. I don't know whether I need to. And I want to make that commitment to actually doubling down on being able to spend more time on the podcast and being able to spend more time on my newsletter and, the people who join us on the newsletter. So if you are not currently subscribed to the podcast, subscribe so that you get the notifications when we release a new episode. And if you're not currently subscribed to the newsletter, go and subscribe, because there are interesting things that happen on that. And that I send out every week religiously on a Wednesday, on a Friday. And we talk about the best types of sales techniques to use. And we have newsletters that are focused twice a week on things like tips, techniques that you might want to use, motivation and inspiration. And for now, that's where I'd rather be. So just in case you were wondering and thinking, oh my God, you were sort of on social media and now you're not. That's why. I just don't feel like it right now. And I'm busy. And currently, if you can hear snoring in the background, it is still Max. He has been a little bit sick over the last couple of weeks. So he is snoring much more loudly than usual. But don't worry, it is him and not me. Okay, so now that we're all on the same page about whether or not I'm hiding on social media, let's get into this episode because it's quite an important one. And I know I say that about every episode because obviously I'm biased and think that everything I do is the most important ever. But it is a really important one because we're at a pivotal point in the year now. And we are at the half-year point, which I cannot believe I'm saying, because obviously 2025 has been simultaneously the slowest start to a year ever for a lot of people, but also the quickest year ever. And I think that now is the perfect point to start looking at your half-year analysis on where you are now. And without beating yourself up if it's been slow, or without taking your foot off the gas if it has been amazing, figure out what you're going to do for the next 6 months, because that's really where you're going to be tested. And that's really where you're going to find out, do I have what it takes to nail this year, regardless of how it has started? And that is what I really want to focus on. Also, big side note here to say that if you do decide to subscribe to my newsletter, you will be eligible for early bird tickets for converting corporates in March 2026. And if you are on the newsletter list and you have not hit reply to one of my latest emails saying, Jess put me on the wait list for the best event of the year, I probably can't say that on the internet. That's probably breaking some sort of rule somewhere. The best selling to corporates event of the year, then please make sure that you do go and reply to one of my emails where I've talked about getting on the wait list for converting corporates, because we have got some epic plans for it for March 2026. It is going to be amazing. And the early bird tickets will come out this summer. But obviously, if you're not on the wait list, you won't get one of the early bird tickets. And that will be problematic on 2 counts. One, because we are limited to spaces in the room, and two, because you will pay a more expensive price. So, it's up to you, but that's what I'm saying. If you're not subscribed to the newsletter, you want deets on converting corporates, just drop me an email and we can get you on there. All right. So, half year point, how are we all feeling? I feel like that's an open-ended question. Well, I know it's an open-ended question. And every time I've asked it of anybody that is not currently a participant in one of my programs, I get very similar answers. And it sits in two camps. Either people are like, this year is the year that I've knuckled down, I'm doing the work, I am taking the advice from my podcast or newsletters or wherever else they're getting their information. They're actually doing it and they're going some and they're like, yeah, I'm all guns blazing, everything's amazing, whoop, whoop, whoop. The more common answer that I'm getting is, oh my God, 2025 is a ride. And people are seeing really, really difficult times in their business. And obviously, we've talked about this a lot on the podcast, so I'm not going to rehash any of that. But what I will say is the best advice I've ever been given was during the recession, and a former sales director, said to me when I was working in corporate, the best salespeople are made in these tough times, right? Because anyone can sell. Anyone can sell in a good market. But the people who can sell in a bad market, a rough market, they will fly during the rough market and moving forward. Because the market will always change. It will always go up. It will always go down. It'll be good. It'll be bad. Doesn't matter. But the importance of being a salesperson who's able to roll with that and do well in both, it's critical for all businesses, not just small businesses. Okay, so it's not just critical for small business owners who are running solo practices. It is critical for every single business. And believe me, a lot of the companies that I'm working with right now are spending a lot of time and energy on training their salespeople because they know that the market is turbulent. That is how it is across the board. And so the ones that are investing that time and money and energy into training their salespeople, they are getting exponentially better results than they were when they weren't training salespeople. And most importantly, they are making sure that they retain the cream of the crop so that when the market goes back to being easy and smooth, they've got salespeople who are motivated, who are driven, who are well trained, and they are going to make a ton of cash when the market is good. And they're going to make a ton of cash when the market is turbulent, and they're going to make a ton of cash when the market is bad. And you might not think that that's possible because maybe you're in that camp where 2025 has been slow, where 2025 has been more difficult. And if you are, that doesn't have to be your reality for the next 6 months. But there are some things that will keep you stuck there. And if you have been in the camp that is, I've overachieved, this year has been amazing for me, then I want you to remember that you have to keep going. Because sometimes I see people who are absolutely amazing and they're overachieving and they're doing incredibly well. And then it's like they sabotage it because they're like, well, I've done loads of work now. I don't need to do any more. That's fine. And obviously that's not how sales works. Okay. So I just want to let you know that wherever you are on that spectrum is totally fine at the half year point. What happens or has happened up until this point does not have to define where you end up at the end of this year. But it does mean that you might have some decisions and therefore changes to make. And that's what's important now. So that's what I want to cover off. And I'm going to share a framework with you that I designed specifically for this podcast episode. So, when people are all over the internet like, oh my God, I worked for months on this framework and it's amazing. I did not. But I thought about the title of this podcast and it had the word epic in it. And I was like, oh yeah, actually, no, that fits with some of the things I'm going to say. And in my typical nerdy way, decided I would create a little framework for you to use specifically for this half year point based around my wordy nerdiness. So enjoy that when it comes. Okay. So even though, and I'm sharing this because we've just had this discussion about where I've been this year and where I'm spending my energy and time and blah, blah, blah. even though this year has been, on the personal front, a shenanigan for me, I have still been prioritizing my business development in the way that works for me and in the time that I've had. And actually, that means that business-wise for me, things are good, which I think we can sometimes forget, because, and I've been really guilty of this year. I was saying to Owen last week, I've spent more time on phone calls for things that are not business related over the last 8 weeks than I've ever spent. And I'm calling solicitors and surveyors and like estate agents and every single other person involved in the process almost every day. And there was one day I spent 5 hours on phone calls for things that were not related to my business at all. And I felt really crappy that week because I was just like, I've not been able to prioritize my business at the same level that I normally would. Because in between a day of 5 hours of phone calls and the inevitable emails that come up afterwards and the inevitable phone calls that you have to do to follow things up, and actually serving my clients who have paid me to make sure that I am on form and doing all of those things, there was very, very little time for me and for my business. And I think that we have to acknowledge that. And that it's really important to acknowledge that, because these times do happen. There are times where, for you, it might not be that you're going through house buying shenanigans. It might be that one of your kids is sick. It might be that you're kind of juggling the travel piece at the moment with a spouse. It might be that you are having to take less time for your business because you're prioritizing health, or your own health, or somebody else in your family's health. Like, all of these things are fine. But what is not fine is saying that because these things are happening, you have no time for business development. And I hear that a lot, and I have heard that a lot in 2025. People have said, oh, but Jess, you have so much time because you don't have children, so that's why you can do business development. Or, oh, but Jess, you have a business that's already successful, so that's why you can do business development. That's not the case. I can assure you that I don't know how parents do it. You guys are absolute heroes. But just because I do not have children does not mean that I don't understand how not having time works, or that I have endless amounts of time, because that isn't the case. I'm really fortunate in that I do a lot of business development, which means that I make a lot of sales, which also means that I have a lot of delivery that is high brain work, high intensity brain work. And so that has to be catered for, right? I'm not doing this I can't remember who it was that was like, oh, we all have the same 24 hours in a day, because that's rubbish. But what I am saying is we all go through peaks and troughs, or seasons in our businesses where we have more time or less time. And the point here is we all still have to make time for business development. So even if that is not at your usual output, and over the last few months it has not been able to be for me, it doesn't mean you just stop, right? A few years ago, I hired a running coach. This was actually before I decided I was going to do the London Marathon. It was a few years before that I thought I might get into running. And in typical Jess fashion, I was like, right, I'm going to get myself a running coach, see what the crack is. And I had this running coach for 2 sessions because I was really bad at it. And actually they said to me, if you're going to take up running, you have to take it a bit more seriously than you currently are. And also, I usually work with runners who are a bit better, which was fair enough. Essentially, I was fired by a running coach, but I got a really valuable lesson. So it was my first ever run. I'd literally never run for anything before, like a bus or a tube occasionally, but not like running in trainers outside for things. Anyway, we're going on this run, and this running coach said to me, we're going to do 3 miles. And I was like, yeah, sure, whatever. I had no concept of what 3 miles was, and in my head, I couldn't work out whether it was particularly far or not. But after about the first 250 meters, I was like, oh, so we're like a mile in. And he was like, no. And at that point, I realized it was going to be hard. And I wasn't thrilled about this. And I'd set out way too fast. I was all go for it. And so I'd run this first few 150 meters, and it was on on a little bit of an incline. I'm going to preface this with, not a hill, just a bit of an incline. And so I'm like huffing and puffing and I can't catch my breath. And I realize that I'm like sweating profusely and like red-faced tomato. And this running coach looks at me after I'm like, oh, so we must be like a mile, right? Because I'm, away from my house. And he says, look, you've got quite a long way to go. And I said, oh, right, well, shall I stop then? Because I'm really finding this hard. And he said, no. He was like, you can move as slowly as you want to, but you have to keep moving. He was like, you have to keep, even if your like slowest jog is slower than your slowest walk, you have to keep moving with that same kind of action. And I felt ridiculous. And that 3 miles, I will say, took me longer than I could have walked 3 miles more quickly than I ran it at that point. Anyone who's ever done Couch to 5K will understand this. But the lesson that I learned there was it's okay not to go in at the high intensity point of something that you don't know or you don't understand or you're just not that good at, as long as you don't stop. And that's how I approached business development this year. I was like, do you know what? I don't have the time or inclination on some weeks when I've spent hours and hours chasing various things and doing admin, which I hate, to do the same volume. But as long as I don't stop, that's okay. And I think that that's something that particularly this year, when I've talked about it with people in real life or on Zoom calls or whatever, has really resonated. It's that idea of people have been punishing themselves because they've not been able to do as much as they thought they could. And actually, sometimes we have to take a step back and be like, right, if we're in delivery mode, if we've sold a lot and we're doing lots and lots of high intensity delivery with clients, if we've got other things going on in life, if, XYZ's happening and it just means that we don't have the same time as normal, as long as we don't stop, that's okay. Unfortunately, a lot of people do stop and that becomes problematic in and of itself. But I think it's an important lesson to take into the second half of this year. Even if you've been slower than normal, you can still turn this around. This is okay, right? So let's talk about why that is. And I think, the key thing here is we are seeing two types of people in the entrepreneurial space at the moment. So we're seeing people who are highly motivated and doing the work. And we're seeing people who are lacking in motivation and doing a bit of the work. They get very different results. And I get it because I've been on both sides of that coin this year. In January, I was like, woo! Well, late January, let's face it. We've all listened to the podcast episode that I recorded in February. But in late January, I was like, woo, it's been a slower start, but I'm like ready. I'm coming back now. And then, life hit and I was like, oh, like now I have to rely on discipline rather than motivation. So if you've been on both sides of that coin this year, that's fine. It's all cool. You will definitely have flipped both sides of the coin at some point during this 12-month period because that's called life. That's called having your own business. It sucks. You will love it. Okay. But we have to start thinking about where we currently are on that scale and how long we've been there. So if you're somebody who's been super motivated, super fired up, doing loads of work, taking loads of action, seeing loads of results in the first half of this year, you might actually be getting to the point where you're like, I need a little bit of a rest. I need to let my brain relax a little bit. I'm getting a bit tired. I'm heading into burnout if I'm not careful, right? And so your priority for the second half of the year might be, how am I strategically planning time off so that I can continue to be my most productive? It might be strategically slowing down some of your efforts so that you can put in the quality that is required to get you, the continuous sales call pipeline, etc., booked for September. If you're somebody who's on the other side of that and you're like, I'm lacking motivation, I'm doing some of it, but it's kind of a bit half-hearted and whatever, I get you and I feel you and, I empathize. But also, you might need to think about time to buckle up, and think about, okay, well, I might not be super motivated, but actually motivation isn't required to run my business. Discipline is. And maybe I've had a lot of time where I haven't done as much as I normally would. And so actually I'm out of practice. I'm out of the habit. And maybe I'm not going to get motivation by continuing to sit and tell myself that I don't have any motivation to do things, right? So I've had both of those conversations with myself at various points this year. I can say, it's fine, it exists. But you have to decide. And we are at a pivotal point, because if you do nothing now, there are things that are going to happen. There are quite serious consequences, So over the last few years of having the podcast, I've talked every single September about how September is the very best month to sell to corporates. It is. It is when companies sign the most contracts. It is when we see the most business. It is when we see people being able to get things across the line in the quickest possible time. And there are lots of reasons. And if you want to know exactly why September is amazing for selling to corporates, go back and check out the back catalogue in September. There are episodes galore on it. However, it is only the best time for people who are prepared and have a sales strategy and are doing stuff now to be able to leverage that in September. Because what I'm seeing is this dangerous, influencer lifestyle type piece where people are like, oh, I just, I'm not going to do anything over the summer, but I haven't really done anything over the last 6 months. And then September will be a good time to sell to corporates because Jess said so. So I'm just going to wait till then. And then I'll expect all of my annual revenue to turn around in 1 month. That's obviously an exaggeration, but I do hear versions of this. And it concerns me. Let's be clear, I don't judge it, I don't care, it's not my business. But it concerns me. Because for anyone to be able to take advantage of September in the best possible way, they have to be doing stuff in June, in July, right up until those summer holidays hit and they want to take time off with their family and relax. They have to be doing that. And a lot of people are not. And if you are not, it doesn't matter that September is the best month to sell to corporates. You still won't be able to leverage it in the same way. And I think that somehow, somewhere, the messaging has got a little bit lost for people when they're thinking, okay, well, I'll just do it in this month, or I'll just do this one thing, or I'll just take this one bit of action. And then either it works or it doesn't. And that determines the whole rest of their activity and feelings about their business and themselves and all this kind of thing. And unfortunately, everything that we do is continuous effort. So it's not good enough to wait for September. It's not good enough to down tools now and say, oh, okay, well, I'll just pick it back up in September and then it's okay, I'll catch up. And those things, unless you are remarkably self-disciplined and self-motivated, they don't happen. What ends up happening to people is they down tools now, they tell themselves they'll start in September, they tell themselves that they just need a bit more time out to relax, whatever. And then they come back in September and they go, oh, it's so overwhelming. I've got so much to do. I've put so much on my plate. I haven't done all these things that I should have done over the summer. And now I need to prioritize them, and I need to prioritize sales activity, and the wolf is at the proverbial door. And because they're so overwhelmed, they end up not doing a lot and not taking action. And they head into the next year feeling like they scuppered all of their opportunities and that they've done loads and loads of work, because they are doing lots of busy work, but that they haven't got a lot to show for it. And that shouldn't be how people end up feeling, because I speak to lots of people every single week who are doing lots and lots of work. It's just not the right things. And that's why I think we need this little framework to understand what we actually should be doing in this time period of the year, so that we can have that epic second half, however the current, half of the year has gone for you, so that we can really have that absolutely epic second half of the year and end it on a high, because it's going to speed around. And I don't want you sat there thinking, oh gosh, this just has been so awful. I want you to be thinking, do you know what? I'm really proud of myself. However my financial year looks, I'm proud of myself. I've put in the work. I've built the foundations. I've got a solid pipeline. Let's go for 2026. Okay. So let's talk about framework then. Now, I'm going to say that I did, before I recorded this episode, I got this really lovely post in the C-Suite group community that I want to share with you. I'm not going to tell you who it's from because that would breach all sorts of confidentiality, things that I don't like to do. But I had a really lovely post from somebody in the C-suite group community that I think is super relevant to this episode. And this person said, "It's safe to say that since joining this group, my business has transformed. And although I absolutely still love working with my one-to-one clients and using socials more as documentation and behind the scenes versus sales, having the corporate side of my business boom over the course of the last 6 months has been such a game changer and has meant that I've had so much more variety in my work, more in-person connection and predictability in income. It's actually also fueled my one-to-one business because staff members end up wanting to work with me one-to-one after I've delivered. For anyone still dabbling in it but unsure, keep going because this stuff works. And massive thanks to Jess for her wisdom and work." Now, that I'm obsessed with, obviously, because it strokes the ego and makes me so happy that somebody's using and doing and implementing and getting results. But it's also such a good reminder of what 6 months of solid implementation can look like. And I think that's really, really important. So as we go into talking about this framework and talking about some of the things that you want to put in place so that you can have that epic second half of the year, I just want you to hear those words. Over the last 6 months has been a game changer. That could be you, right? It absolutely could be you. And if you are sat there thinking, but 6 months is too long and it's going to be ages and I don't have 6 months to wait, then I want you to go back and listen to that 30-day sales mindset podcast episode that I recorded a few weeks ago, because we have to start accepting that we need to build a sales pipeline and not we have to take everything in the immediate moment. Because a lot of people, especially people who are inexperienced with sales, are not creating things immediately that are selling immediately. Okay, there are lots of reasons why, but it's not possible for everybody. And instead, we need to have that longer term focus. Do 30 days of solid implementation, see results, see things coming in, see your pipeline being built, see it as the foundations so that you're building something that is long term, that is sustainable, that is predictable. Okay, and start thinking about your business in those bigger chunks. So, framework, let's talk about it. It's the EPIC framework. Okay, I will say I've developed this, so if you like it, let me know. And if you don't like it, it's fine. You don't need to tell me. But please don't steal it. Because you never know, I might want to put it in a book or something. Casual plug there for any book that I future release. But I wanted, when I was thinking about this episode, I wanted to talk about the points that we need to start considering. And I think a framework really helps with that because it gives you a bit of an anchor, a reminder of how you can start putting things together. So obviously, because I am a giant word nerd, I wanted to call the episode, how to make the next 6 months of your sales strategy epic. And then I was like, oh, epic, that's a good word. That'll fit my framework. And it does. So yay. Welcome to the official debut of the EPIC framework from Selling to Corporate. So we start with E, and E is emotional. So when we get to the point of a half-year analysis, what can happen is that we can start looking at our business and become very emotional about it. We can fall into self-criticism. I haven't done enough. It isn't good enough. I'm a failure. We can fall into rampant positivity. I am the best salesperson in the world. My business is amazing. There has never been anyone better than me. Woo! Hopefully you're on that scale. But emotion is really hard to run your business from. And actually what we need to do when we're looking at any kind of analysis, specifically of our sales process, we need to detach from whatever has happened so far so that we can take a step back and understand how we can either replicate results that we want to continue or how we can change things that we don't. So that emotional pull that we have, and it happens a lot in sales. We get these emotional attachments to everything. We get the emotional attachment to our revenue and decide that our self-worth is based on how much we are generating. We get attached to individual sales. So we end up not maybe pushing them as far as we could down the line because we worry that if we email them that extra time, then maybe they'll say no because of the extra email. We get emotionally attached to clients. And we can take things really personally from clients and prospects who tell us that, maybe our work isn't a priority right now. And we can take that really personally because, of course, our work is a priority. And of course, it should be the main thing that everyone is focused on. And it hurts when it isn't. So being emotionally attached in your sales process is very normal, but it makes it really hard to analyze because if we are emotionally attached to the things that we're doing, even when they're not producing results, it's really, really hard to reflect and actually make changes. Equally, if you're emotionally attached to the sales process and everything's going magically well, which we love, it's really hard to take a step back and look at what are the next efficiencies? What are the small tweaks that we need to make now to make it even better? Because we just want to ride the wave of this is amazing, everything's amazing. But in doing so, we might actually miss something that could be stopping or bottlenecking our sales moving forward, or that could cause problems in the future. So the first thing we have to do with any kind of half-year analysis is step back emotionally. Detach yourself from the business for a second and start looking at your numbers and start looking at your results and saying, do I want to create more of this or not? Because when we do it from a detached place, we can start looking at our revenue and being like, okay, cool, that's not the revenue that I actually wanted this year. So what has produced the revenue that I've made and what actually hasn't produced anything? Okay. One of my clients talked about this year the fact that they've given up using social media entirely. I thought it was amazing. But they said, they were like, I was terrified, absolutely petrified to do it. But when I started looking at my numbers, posting on social media hadn't brought me any qualified sales calls with companies. So what's the point in doing it? And I honestly could have cheered because I was like, yes. But if they'd have been looking at that from an emotionally charged perspective, some of the fears that they had around, if I give it up, people won't know that I exist. If I give it up, will people think I haven't been successful? If I give it up, what if the rest of my sales process doesn't work? These are all normal, natural fears, but they come from that emotional place rather than being the objectivity of, okay, I've posted every day on social media for however many years and I've never had a qualified sales call from it. So actually, could I be putting that time into something else that was better? And it turns out they could, right? So I want you to step back emotionally and start thinking, what has your revenue been this year? How has it been? And are you looking at your activities objectively and looking at where have the positives come from? Because even in the worst years, you will still have some positive indicators. You still will have booked some sales calls. If you haven't, you need to, think, okay, well, my lead generation might need to change. You will still have had some positive processes, even if you had things go through to proposal and then not close. There will be things that you can learn from your process there, but you have to detach. Yeah. And if you have a problem with detaching, obviously drop me an email. I'll send you my half-year gap analysis and you can fill out the questions and I'll tell you where the gaps are. But just as a heads up, like you might secretly know what the answers are, but having me point it out may not be something that you love. But if you're brave enough, email me and I will absolutely send it across to you. Okay. But we have to detach, emotionally. And I can't stress this enough because I have these conversations with people all the time. They'll say to me, I've got 1,000 leads on my database, but I've never closed a sale. I just need better leads. And I'm like, well, if you are not converting your existing leads, you don't have a lead generation problem. You have a sales problem, right? Or people will say, oh, I've had 100 sales calls this year, but I've only closed 2 sales. I just need more calls. I need better leads. And I'm like, no, you don't need to have more calls because you are really somehow not running these correctly. And if you have more calls, you're just going to have the same issue, but a higher number of those issues, right? So this is not, okay, step back, look at it and go, social media has never produced a call for me. I should write more posts or I should get a copywriting course and whatever. This is about stepping back objectively and saying, okay, here are some problems in my business. What do I think is the issue? Yeah. And stepping back properly and not just assuming that you need more stuff or that you need to do a higher volume of something that isn't currently working. This is about proper analysis and that requires objectivity. The second stage of this half-year analysis process is preparation. So, like I was saying earlier, too many people head into the summer without any kind of plan. Now, if you are inside the C-suite, you will notice that there is a summer plan. You can type it into the portal in the search bar and it'll pop right up and you can absolutely follow it. And you can do that around however your summer looks. If you want to do it week by week during the summer, or if you want to do it all now so that you can take the whole summer off, whatever you want. But if you're in the C-suite, go and grab the summer plan out, especially if you've forgotten about it, because it is absolutely golden. And it will really help you save your sanity over the summer and also make sure that you are filling your pipeline for September, because that's what we all want to do. What I generally see across the market is that lots and lots of people want the flexibility of their business over the summer. So we have lots of conversations about people wanting to take the whole summer off. I completely agree. I take all of August off generally because I don't want to be working. I want to enjoy the sunshine and time with Max and like just other things that are going on. However, most people want that flexibility, but are not putting in the preparation steps required to be able to confidently do that and then relax. So what ends up happening is people say, I'm taking the whole summer off, but then be surprised because they didn't plan early for that they don't have any sales pipeline in September. And then they create panic then. Or they will take the time off, not prepare for that time off, and then end up having to work. And it will be that emergency type work or firefighting that ends up happening and really has them hating their summer because they're like, oh gosh, I wasn't going to do any work, but here I am on this Zoom call at 6 p.m. because I didn't think about XYZ that I needed to do. So our second step is preparation. Yes, September is absolutely the best month of the year to sell to corporates. It is an absolutely golden month, but it will only work if you have a plan. And part of that plan requires you either having sales calls now and opening sales processes now, and then going into September with contracts, with work that you've sold now and are delivering then, or you being able to do activities now that are building a pipeline for September. And by that, I mean doing sales activities now that are booking sales calls in for September, doing activities now that are helping you to create offers that are going to be directly relevant in September and sellable in September. And if you are not preparing for those kinds of things, if you're like, no, I'm just tired, I need some time off, I'm just going to take the summer and then I'm going to come back, you are going to set yourself back 3 months. Because as we all know, from me banging on about the podcast for the last 5 years, what you do today will make a difference to your business in 90 days' time. So if you are not taking actions today, in September, you're going to be like, oh God, I'm 3 months behind where I need to be. And that's going to feel worse. All right. So whatever you need to do now, whatever outcome you're working to in September, you need to be planning for it. You need to be preparing for it. And even if you want to take 6 to 8 weeks off, totally fine. You need to have a plan for how you're going to navigate that. And that means for a lot of you that there are at least another 2-3 working weeks in the year, as of this episode coming out, that you will need to work hard and implement so that you can have a really, really good September. Okay. Then we move into I. So it probably won't surprise you that my I from the EPIC framework is implementation. Okay. At this half-year analysis point, we need to assess our implementation so far and commit to what we will be implementing moving forward. And I think that this is something I can't stress enough. The people who are most successful in my programs are the people who are implementing consistently, not the people who are implementing at the highest volume and then fall off the wagon because they're like, oh gosh, I've done loads and loads, to use my running analogy from earlier. I've run up the hill at full speed and realized I can't go anymore. They are the people who implement consistently. And also the people who, because I work with a lot of intelligent people, I'm very fortunate, and that everybody I work with is smart. They override their natural ability to overthink and procrastinate through overthinking and instead focus on implementation. Those are the people who do best in my programs, and they're also the people who do best at sales in general. Okay? Because what can happen and what you might have found in the first half of this year is that you've been telling yourself that you will do things, and then maybe you've been afraid to do them. Okay, so maybe you told yourself you would do proactive outreach and start generating leads and start booking sales calls with companies, but you weren't really sure what to write or what to do or how to do it, so you didn't, and now you still don't have leads or sales calls. And that's a problem. Yeah? It's okay not to beat yourself up about where you are, but it is not okay to continue that trend and expect different results. So if you have been absolutely amazing in the first half of this year and you've been somebody who's massively overachieved even, I'm just amalgamating words now. If you've been somebody who has massively overachieved in the first half of this year, I want you to look at it and go, okay, what did I implement? What's made the big difference to me? What do I want to keep doing in the second half of this year to continue that trend of results? So again, this is all about analysis. It's looking at what has come before and what we want to do next. And implementation is going to be such a big part of that, because sales is not a thinking sport. It's a doing sport, right? In order to see results, we have to do the things, we have to experiment, we have to take consistent action over a consistent time period. And because people are a little bit stressed this year, maybe feeling a little bit more negative this year, people want to try one thing and for it to get mega results instantly, or they feel even more disheartened and they stop doing. That's not the name of the game. So if you have found that the first half of this year you haven't got the results that you wanted, let's look at implementation. Have you implemented everything that is part of your current sales strategy? What has worked? What hasn't worked? Why? Because I know that a lot of people are doing an awful lot. They're very, very busy, but a lot of the time they're focused on busy work that isn't producing results rather than implementing real sales techniques and strategies that are focused on revenue generation or specifically booking sales calls or specifically generating the right leads. Sometimes we're focusing on the busy work around visibility and awareness and things like that, but that isn't what pays the bills. So take a step, whether you've been underachieving in your own mind or overachieving, and think about, what have I implemented? What do I want to continue? What am I going to commit to doing in the second half? And that might require a learning curve, and if it does, don't worry, I've got you covered. You don't know how to do lead generation? Got a course for you. Don't know how to run a sales call? Got a resource for you. Don't know how to leverage your existing database? I can help you. So we can always find resources to make implementation easier, but we do actually have to commit. And we do actually have to understand and analyze, just like we said in the first point, in an emotionless way or an objective way, what has worked and what hasn't, so that we can do less of the stuff that hasn't worked and more of the stuff that has. And then finally, we've got celebration. Now, I think that this is possibly the most important part of the entire framework. Celebration is not giving yourself a bit of a pat on the back and falsely telling yourself that everything's fine when it isn't. But it is about stepping back and celebrating either something you have done and achieved. So maybe you've made your first corporate sale this year, and that's amazing, like absolutely incredible. Maybe you're somebody who never thought you'd sell to companies, and you've made a sale with a company this year. Maybe you are not somebody who sold your first ever deal with a corporate, but you're somebody who's changed your offerings this year and you've done something different, or you've revolutionized your industry in some way. That's something to be celebrated. Maybe you've hit a revenue goal. Maybe that's a monthly revenue goal, or you're half year to date, you're on track. Like whatever that is that you've done, you can celebrate. And if you're thinking, oh, but Jess, I haven't done anything because, this year has not been a good year, you should be celebrating not necessarily things that you've done, because maybe you don't feel like there are things there that you can pull out, but things that you've learned, right? Because so many people spend all their time focused on that negative. Oh, I haven't achieved my revenue goal. I haven't had as many sales calls as I wanted to. We can all think of loads of things that we haven't done well. But instead of celebrating the fact that they have learned from that and saying, okay, well, I didn't have as many sales calls as I wanted to, because actually it turns out I don't have a lead generation process. So good news. I've learned that I don't have a lead generation process that is working to convert calls. I'm going to fix that. And at the end of this year, I'm going to have had more sales calls, and that's going to be great. Or, they don't celebrate the fact that they've learned about whatever's stopped them generating revenue. I have people who say, I've had hundreds and hundreds of sales calls, but they're not turning into deals. And when I say, well, what have you learned from that? They're like, well, just sales calls don't work. And I'm like, that's not the key learn here. So sometimes we have to look and celebrate what we have learned. Is it that if your sales calls haven't been turning into proposals, actually what we've learned there is we're probably not structuring them in the right way. Maybe we're not actually running them commercially. Maybe we're starting every single one with, hey, how are you? And running it a bit like a chat and hoping that they're going to sell themselves on our products and services. Or maybe we're running it like a pitch and we're just bombarding them with information about how great we are and our services are and how they should take everything. And the poor decision maker on the other end is kind of glazing over and hoping that it will end soon. Yeah. There are always things that we have done that we are not necessarily proud of or that haven't produced the results that we wanted, but we have to learn from that experience. And I tell everybody inside the C-suite that when we look at the important pieces that make up a successful sales process, generally we have 3 parts. We have strategy. So are we using the right strategy? And if we're not, we can celebrate the fact that we have learnt the bits that are not working in our current strategy, whatever we're using. We have implementation. So again, we can either celebrate the fact that we have done, that we have implemented, that we are seeing results, that we are seeing progress. Or we can learn from the fact that we haven't implemented at the right volume, or we haven't actually looked at quality implementation. And so we've just done things at volume and at speed, but we actually haven't put the quality effort in that was required. Or we can learn that we've procrastinated and that we do need to figure out ways around our own mindset or things that are keeping us stuck from doing the work. And then finally, we have accountability. And that's really important. Are we accountable to the goal? And we can celebrate that we are part of a community or that we have business friends and peers and colleagues who are qualified to keep us accountable to our goals, who are capable of giving us criticism when we need that is constructive. We can, celebrate that we are being led or guided by mentors or coaches or strategists or whoever else in our business that are giving us advice and that we are following. Or we can learn, we can learn from a lack of accountability. Perhaps we have had accountability pieces in place previously. Perhaps you were part of an accountability group or a program that you now actually aren't, or that you've outgrown, or that isn't working for you in the same way that it was. And you actually need a higher level of accountability. Maybe it's that you're learning that you have got a coach or a mentor or a strategist or whoever's guiding you, and you've learned a lot, but you haven't implemented it. So you need to learn or have that learn of, I need to be spending my time doing and not learning more. I need that person to be chivvying me along a bit, right? And getting me to do the things that I already think that I know. There are so many things that we could be negative about, especially at this half year point, that will not really serve us moving forward unless we learn from them. Okay. So that is the brand new, brilliantly debuted Epic Framework. Emotion, preparation, implementation, and celebration. And they all end in shun, and that's really satisfying to me. Either way, I hope that you've enjoyed this episode and that you've got a lot from understanding where your sales process is at currently and analysing how you can either continue an amazing trajectory into the rest of 2026 or how you can change your current situation. Like I say, have a little think about those things. If you need my support to analyse your half year to date because you're not sure where things have gone a little bit awry, drop me an email and ask me for the sales gap analysis. And I will absolutely ask you some questions about your business that will give you all of the insights into why and where that needs to change. All right. I will see you in the next episode. Have an epic rest of your day.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.